Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's presentation. I'm going to go ahead and get the presentation going. Dun, dun, dun. Hello. So hopefully everyone can see the slide okay. And today we have 5 great presenters that are going to share what they've learned during opening their library during this time of COVID. We have Jenny Berg from McMinnville Public Library, Ginny Blackson from the Linfield University Library, Michael Bowman from the Portland State University, Todd Dunkelberg from Deschutes Public Library System, and Meg Spencer from the Siuslaw Public Library District. And so what I thought we would do today is have each of our presenters share for about 5 to 7 minutes. And then at the very end, we'll go ahead and open it up for questions. At that point, I would really encourage you to unmute your mic and just ask your question, or if you're more comfortable using the chat, my colleague Tamara is here to help us moderate all of that. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Jenny. Jenny, do you want?
That's not me on the screen.
No, that's true.
So that's the, why don't you, well, we can do that. You know what, you actually, do you have that link, Darcy? Or
I do. Do you want me to share the video now, or would you like to introduce yourself real quick?
Why don't you just share the video in the video link in chat?
Okay.
And we don't necessarily need to watch the video.
Okay, hold on a sec.
So, hi, everybody. I'm Jenny Berg at the McMinnville Public Library. And as I was thinking about this, I realized that to me, the more important question than how to open the library is why. And because I realized that that was something that we very early on were talking about. And I, from what I hear from other places that have not reopened, that there's a variety of reasons to not reopen. And yet I think that there's also a variety of reasons to reopen. And we actually reopened fairly early on. I guess we were closed for about 3 months. However, we, within a couple of weeks of closing and realizing that we were going to be closed for longer than a couple of weeks, implemented our home delivery of books. And basically how that came about is there is a really great locally owned independent bookstore here in town. And I'm on their email list, and they started doing home delivery of their books. And I just thought, well, why can't we do that? And then I started thinking about the restaurants in town and how they were all doing delivery. And, you know, thinking about what's involved in that in terms of cooking, packing food up, passing it on to a driver of some type, and just feeling like, look, if the state is saying that that's okay, and who knows how many people that service is passing through before it's getting to somebody's house, and people are feeling comfortable to do that, then why can't we do that at the library? We are just as an essential service, and we're going to be just as careful, if not more careful, than other libraries, or I'm sorry, than those other businesses. And so I just felt like all those signs pointed to me presenting that to staff, just saying, you know, these businesses are doing it, we should too. These businesses, and it's not fair for us to say, well, we survive on taxpayers' dollars and we don't have to actually be open in order to make money and make our business work. It didn't seem right to me to necessarily just kind of rest on, and not to say that everybody's resting on their laurels, but it just didn't seem right to me to have all these other businesses doing everything they can to continue to serve their customers and not have us try and do the same. So there was that aspect of it, and that was part of what I brought to our library staff. And it was not so much a we will do this. It was more of a, hey, supervisors, I see these other businesses doing these things. Why can't we? How can we? How might this work? And so again, it was not then it wasn't an edict. It was a conversation, a discussion about, look, these other organizations are doing this. Why can't we? Shouldn't we be doing something as well? And that made it so that it was a not something that was, a top down, this is what's going to happen. It was a, let's figure out how we can do this together to continue to remain relevant to our patrons. And a big part of it was also about, there is, we have to balance physical health and emotional health. And I'm sure that we all really feel this way now after so many months. I mean, it's a struggle on an ongoing basis to manage that, to manage our mental and emotional health. And I know that there are a lot of people in our communities who rely on the library for their mental health and their emotional health. And so for all of those reasons, those were my answers to the why we should reopen. In terms of the how, I am a person who I don't necessarily rely on plans. Or I rely on plans, but they can easily change. And that's how this, I think actually this webinar came up, or not webinar, but this panel is, there was somebody that reached out on the listserv saying, does anybody have any, what was your reopening plan? And I knew that I don't have a single document that says, here's how it's going to go, to send to people. But I felt like I was very willing and happy to discuss it with people. But I feel like COVID has been the information has been changing on such a regular basis. And I had, staff people saying, well, we need a written plan. And my thought was just, why? It will change in 2 hours. The information that we have available to us is going to change hourly, daily, weekly. We're going to do this now until we have more information, and then we'll do something else. One of the staff people, the supervisor, who had asked, what really wanted a plan, and he was laughing recently about, if we had a plan, it would probably be 50 pages long by now, with all of the different, well, we changed this because of this, we changed this because of this. So you do what you can with the information that you have. We did use some plans that others put forth as kind of a checklist, as a, let's make sure that we remember to think about these things. And we did have some things written out, but I also feel like all of our communities are so different. All of our libraries are so different that even that was not necessarily a plan that could translate from one library to another. So we use those checklists just to say, okay, is this something we're going to consider? Is this not something that we're going to consider? We did, after developing the plan, and I was letting the city manager know that we were discussing this. So it wasn't, I wasn't going completely rogue, but just letting him know that we were considering reopening and talking about how we would go about doing that. And did invite him over at some point in time to sort of talk through what we would do. But it was something that was already mostly arranged, that he could then put in his input if he wanted to. We also had somebody from the Yamhill County Health Authority come over and take a look at our plan as well. But it really was just a lot about communicating with staff, developing the plan, but having then people able to point out, well, what about this? What about this? And changing the plan accordingly, and just a lot of communication. I have the benefit of having a staff of 23 people. So it's a fairly small staff. If I need to convey something, I can go directly to the page if I choose to, and, talk directly to the page. I'm not filtering it down through a huge organization, which is helpful. And then we actually did a staff re-engagement that was about a 3-hour training where we talked about a lot of things, not just about the reopening. We went to our civic hall and wore masks and stayed physically distanced and talked about the plan. And this was a couple of days before we actually reopened. So and then we took the staff and walked them through the process so they could see all of the different things that we did and all of the different decisions that were made and the reasoning behind those decisions being made. So that what made it also helpful for them when we had other people coming into the library, that they could explain our reasoning behind the decisions that we made, so that they had the communication skills to be able to talk to library patrons about the things that we were doing for safety purposes. And interestingly, also talk to people who, not necessarily COVID deniers, but people who thought we were going way overboard in terms of safety, and, just being able to manage that other perspective as well. So, what I take away from it is a lot of communication, open communication, going both directions, a sort of understanding of that, we exist to serve patrons. And if we're not doing that, we're not going to exist. And so if there's staff pushback in terms of opening, I think that there's a point where it's like, well, eventually there won't be a library if we don't reopen and re-engage. And we're going to do it in the safest way we can. Keep communicating that message, and be open to feedback from staff. So I will regularly open staff meetings by just saying, what do people think? Give me feedback. I want to hear what you have to say. I don't have all the answers, not by a long shot. Where's your comfort level? What do you feel like we can do, we can't do? And I want to balance that, because we're all in it together in terms of it's not just about what I decide that service is going to be. We're really talking about the safety of everybody else, the staff involved. So not really a plan, but more of this is my, my methodology of how to go about it if you're thinking about reopening. The thought process more so than the checklist.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Jenny. That's really, I really like that approach, because you're right. You could end up with a 50 or 100-page plan by the time we're all done with this. I wanted to go ahead and have Ginny speak next, if you're ready.
And sorry.
Oh, yes, go ahead.
One last thing, that what you saw on the website there, I think that Darcy sent a link to it, and basically it's a link that is a YouTube video of here's what the library looks like upon reopening. So we put that out on our Facebook page so people knew what to expect upon coming in. But it also will give you a good idea of here's what we did, here's the things we changed. So you can have kind of an idea in your mind of what it looks like. Thanks.
Great,
sorry.
Thanks. No worries. All right, Ginny.
So I'm Ginny Blackson, and I'm the university librarian here in McMinnville for Linfield University. And I just put up some pictures around of what's going on around our library. So Linfield was a kind of outlier. The campus reopened on July 15th. And the expectation was that everyone not on a work from home accommodation would come in, and that all of our departments would be open. I negotiated 2 weeks to be able to get the library and staff ready. And then we had a little less than a month before our students returned. One of the things that I held pretty hard to was to not reinvent the wheel. So we had a university reopening and recovery committee. There was not a library representative on that, but I stayed in very close contact with my committee representative. And what we hoped was that we wouldn't have to make library temporary policies, that we would be able to influence the university temporary policies so that they weren't library policies being enforced, but university-wide. And so one of the things that we did was make sure that the face covering policy for the campus was good and in place and in the same in every building. So our policy has been that face coverings are required all over campus, even the walking trails, except when eating in the dining tent and when in their dorms. We also got agreement to limit access to the campus to only current, or to campus buildings to only current faculty, staff, students, and contractors. And Linfield has always prided itself on being a community campus. The community used our buildings quite a bit. The library was open to all residents of Yamhill County, and we had to give a lot of that up in order to keep safe. We needed to keep our students safe, our faculty and staff, and to eliminate any unnecessary opportunities for transmission. There were a couple of things that we did to kind of keep us out of the contact tracing fray. We are lucky that our library had a card swipe entrance, because our library used to be open to the general public until 9 p.m. And after that, the doors locked and people had to swipe in and out. We keep our doors locked all the time now with swipe in and swipe out. And that helps us keep the building secure and enforce the policies, because all of the door swipes on this campus feed to public safety. And so if there was a contact tracing event, public safety is who would be doing that. We wouldn't have to surrender any library records. And Darcy, let me know when I'm at time. There were a couple of collection procedures that we had to implement. We've gone with closed stacks, and this is my first time. I started working in libraries as a student 30 years ago. It's my first experience with closed stacks. But we had a lot of faculty members who had assignments that were basically go as a group and wander the stacks. And so we just decided to close the stacks, and you'll see our signs that we put up, and we used old New York Times microfilm to create our barrier. And that has actually gone really well. We haven't seen any decrease in circulation due to closed stacks. One of the things that we had to do for the first time in my career is think about safety before service. And so one of the things that we started immediately after the campus closed down, we had one staff member come to the building every day. We mailed out materials, and we started up a 24/7 reference chat service, which we had not had before. As far as putting safety first in the collection, we adopted one of the first realm recommendations of a 5-day quarantine, and we just stayed with that because we're so dependent on student workers that if we change, it's just going to confuse everyone. So through this academic year, we're staying with the 5 days. We went with positive signage, as you can see. We used a lot of please instead of no's, and we put everything in the context of keeping one another safe. Our students actually had to sign an agreement to return to campus that they would abide by all COVID policies and any staff direction. We also had to put our periodicals away, which has actually led to an increase of periodical use because I think they've become sort of forbidden. And then Linfield adopted a motto after a tragic accident of one of our students many years ago called Linfield Strong. And we've used that in our marketing to our patrons. You'll also see our Wildcat with its little mask on. And I actually printed up a little Wildcat with its mask on. And when I walk around the library, I just hold it up to people who aren't wearing their mask properly.
So Ginny, I am going to cut you off there just for a little bit. I think your message around positive messaging is really valuable. And so I thank you for sharing your experience so far. I do want to leave time for questions at the end.
Thank you.
So thanks, Ginny. Next up, we have Michael from Portland State University.
Right. So I'm Michael Bowman. I'm the interim dean at Portland State. We're in a slightly different position in that we never actually fully closed. We were only closed for 1 week in spring. But when we reopened, we were reopened in a much different way. The handout on the screen is the handout to explain what we're doing in fall, but summer and spring were pretty much the same. We closed 5 floors of the building, went to closed stacks basically, and we only opened the first floor. We removed all seating. There is a campus IT run computer lab on the first floor of the library that remained open down to about 20 computers. The restrooms were open, and in spring, that was it. So answering kind of Jenny's question of why are we opening? In that case, the building was open solely for access to the computer lab because there were only 2 computer labs open on campus. After the installation of plexiglass at the circulation desk with a slot for passing books and laptops through, we then opened in summer, we opened the circulation desk. And so the other purpose now is to pick up, we're still have closed stacks. So in spring, we were mailing equipment. You can see the kind of the sorts and numbers of equipment we have out. We were mailing books, we were doing scan requests, scanning course reserves and delivering those via PDF, that sort of thing. So there was an operation going in the back, but it was all done without connections, direct connections with the patrons. In summer and fall, if people don't want it mailed and want it faster, and they can get into downtown Portland, then they can come in and pick these things up at the reference desk, at the circulation desk. Obviously, reference is remote via chat, text, and email. Instruction, we're doing remote instruction synchronously or asynchronously. I did get some statistics. Our circulation is down 90%, no big surprise. We've served 1,200 scanning requests. Reference is only down 48%. Our chat is up 80%, and our email reference is up 38%. Just thinking about some more general issues, communication was obviously much more important. But at the very beginning, when we were coming up with our policies, since we were only closed for a week, it was in the context of we're trying something out, but people are coming to the back door and it's not working and we have to fix it. We ran into a problem, and that is half the people on the communications team worked in circulation, and the leadership of our web team also worked in circulation. And they were busy answering the door every 5 minutes as people were knocking on it. So we were very slow in the beginning with getting our communications out, because the people that do that were also the people that were in the building. And I'll talk a little bit about that. So we did find in spring people were very forgiving of issues. At this point, they are not. We're kind of back to normal, what kind of normal service or at least behavioral expectations in terms of if they don't like something, they'll complain. Whereas in spring and summer, there was a reluctance on people to do that because they know everyone was cobbling together things. We also found our prior relationships with other units on campus were very important. We had a very long-standing relationship with our Office of Information Technology. The administrators, we've been meeting for 5 or 6 years. The lab management people have been meeting for well over a decade. So the equipment we're loaning came from them, and we were able to quickly set up a group chat and work out loan periods, equipment needs, building hours, that sort of thing. But we had a lot of trust built up and a lot of connections already, which made a big difference. In terms of the building, we've had surprisingly good compliance with health rules. Like Linfield, with the OHA and HEC instructions, building use is restricted to PSU people only. We do have key card access out front. It's on a door that you hit a button and it stays open for a minute, so anyone can come walking in, but people haven't. So I've been surprised how much compliance there has been with the health rules, which is good since there's no enforcement on campus. I mean, we can ask someone to put on a mask, but it doesn't go any further than that. And then the other issue we had is when the campus went remote, only people providing core services that needed to be done in person were allowed to come to campus. So we had to very quickly decide what were our core building services. And initially it was directly about scanning, mailing, both books and equipment. But fairly soon we realized, well, we're ordering books for reserves. Someone needs to come in and receive those books and process them to get them down so we can scan them. So we had to slightly expand our definition of core building services. So initially, I think there was kind of a beginning to be a gap between those employees who kind of felt they needed to go in and those employees who couldn't go in, and about kind of the disparate nature of how their work had diverged in terms of whether they had to kind of, make their way downtown or not. That as we've opened up core building services and more people are coming in for short periods of time, that kind of gap has narrowed, which has been useful. Remotely, there was an issue, issues that we could try to address, employees' technological setups. Initially, it was like, if you need stuff at home, you can borrow one of our loaner laptops. But as time went on, it was like, okay, you can take your computer home, you can take your chair home, you can take your equipment. We haven't said yes to desks yet, but we've adjusted that policy as we've needed to. And our biggest lack really is connections between people. Unit meetings are helping within the unit, but to try to get everyone connected, we took our monthly all library meetings and have made them 30-minute weekly. Almost everyone's been coming to those, even still 6 months later. And people are feeling more informed because they're on a weekly basis. We're, I think, saying more than we had at those meetings. We kind of relied on managers to transmit some of this information. So this is more coming directly from me on a weekly basis. So I think people are kind of more aware, more timely about what's going on. Where we have had problems is with more attempts at social kind of non-meeting interaction. We've tried a few sessions. They've gotten 7 to 10 people, kind of the same people. So we haven't yet figured out a way to try to build a more, kind of get that more informal connections going on a larger scale. We're trying something this Friday with kind of a Halloween chat where, with your kids or your pets or anyone wearing costumes, and we'll see whether that does something. But there's definitely a need expressed, but we haven't been able to figure out a way that seems to work for more than about 10 people. And that's what I got.
Great. Thank you so much, Michael. And next we'll have Todd Dunkelberg share what's been going on in Deschutes.
Okay. Well, I'll keep mine short because it covers a lot of things that have already been covered. So I kind of broke it down into some things we did well, some of our challenges, and what we've learned. A big one for us as well was really connecting with our staff. So having regular all staff meetings via Zoom was really helpful, and just making sure everybody was getting the same information, especially which I'm sure you're experiencing. Everybody is an expert on this, but they're getting their information from wildly different sources. which was another success for us, is really making sure that we tie our decisions based on information that's coming from the state, the Oregon Health Authority, the CDC, not just grabbing random facts off the internet. We opened all our buildings at the beginning of September, and a couple of things as a multi-branch system is very helpful for us to kind of roll that out. We started at our smaller branches, test out some of our theories, and then we could make improvements before we got to our largest branches. It was very helpful to have greeters at the front door, just kind of helping people out, helping them navigate what's happening, making sure they have masks on or handing them masks as they come in. We also partner very closely with Jefferson County and Crook County libraries. So we made sure to coordinate those openings with them as well, so that we all had the same policies and procedures going. And we made sure to keep our public up to date. We send out weekly newsletters. We updated our web every week. Our big challenges, which I'm sure a lot of you are facing, the 72-hour quarantine was a real stress on us. So getting back down to 24 hours is awesome. Really, our biggest challenge right now are the masked non-believers, and we've got plenty of them here. And the training, I'd highly recommend the training that the state provided on approaching people with about wearing masks. And again, that's just a huge challenge. We did have limited computer access before we opened and when we opened, so we really pushed to expand that because that was a big service to not have. Some of the lessons we learned, really, as we've heard from others, involve staff really over communicate, especially when things change on a regular basis, making sure that you're saying the same thing 7 times, and be flexible. This could change day by day, hour by hour, so be prepared. One thing for us, we're also preparing for any possible rollbacks, because we don't want to be in surprise mode when we have to move to the next thing. So I'd recommend that as well. Also, signage. I'm not a big fan of signage, but really trying to lay out what you can expect when you come in the buildings. I love the idea of having a video. People really just want to know, what do you want me to do? And then something, when we opened, we took all of our furniture out. We've started adding back in seating. A big lesson I would say for everybody is, one of our big staff concerns was, well, we're going to open the doors and they're going to come flooding in. And I guarantee you that is not going to happen. Right now, we are down about 33% from normal. People are very good. They come in, they grab their books, they leave. So it's really open, inviting areas. We're not crowded with people. And I think that's a real assurance for staff that are nervous about what it's going to look like. Really, for most libraries, I would assume you're looking at, if you go to any business, grocery store, just go shopping, you're going to feel less claustrophobic and have more area in your libraries than you're going to see anywhere else. So that's what I've got.
Great. Thank you, Todd. I look forward to seeing your video once you've got it made. And then next up, we have Meg from Siuslaw. Meg, are you there? And
yes,
there you go.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
So I am sort of the odd person out, because I'm going to be talking about something a tiny bit different, but that I suspect, as much as I hate to say it, that all of you will be dealing with this at some point. Knock on wood, I hope not, but I wish I had gotten some of this before. I had at the very end of September, I had a staff member who tested positive for COVID-19. what I wanted to talk just a little bit about is how we communicated around that, because it's scary and stressful, and also something that I think is really important. Just to give you a really quick scene setting, the Siuslaw Public Library is a rural library district. We serve about 18,000 folks, but it's also over a landmass that I don't even know why I calculated this at one point, but 2.5 times the size of Singapore. So a huge amount of land and a little amount of people, but also a really well supported and I think pretty awesome system. And I will say, I got my start at Salt Lake City Public in Utah, and then moved to a mid-sized suburban library, and then came to rural, which is where I always wanted to be. But there are times like this when you're in a rural system and you don't have HR and you don't have legal and you don't have a city, and you're on your own to some extent. So I just thought I'd talk a little bit about what I learned as best practices here. First of all, I will tell you, I'm sure you've all been doing planning and reading. We're librarians, we overthink and overread for sure, at least I do. And I will say, nonetheless, when I got the call from the employee, everything went out of my head. I just had to kind of calm myself and start from scratch. Obviously, I was very lucky in that the staff member who tested positive was still and throughout most of it in really good health. There were some symptoms, but it was relatively low symptomatic experience, which helped a lot. This would be a totally different story, I'm sure, if that weren't the case, because that would have been obviously all the focus that I would have had. But I got the call and I immediately had a couple thoughts, one of them being, I don't know what to do. So I had to calm myself down. I went and revisited some of those resources that I'm sure we're all looking at, OSHA, OHA, and the CDC. But especially what I did was I called the Lane County Public Health Line, the helpline. And as it turned out, when I got in touch with them, they told me that I would be getting contacted by their business contact, which indeed came soon after that. And that was a big help. Again, you can do all the reading, but just hearing a voice is incredibly useful. I will say the other thing that helped a lot was that I had already been in contact through our emergency operations group with some of our local hospital and healthcare folks. So I had some of those contacts. And although I couldn't go to them as, you know, and say, advise me, I could at least ask them to read some of what I was writing and thinking about and tell me sort of what their gut check was on that. So basically, like I said, the very first thing on the slide here, listen. I talked a lot to the staff member who was affected. I know that this is I don't know if it's radical, but I really felt like, especially in a small community, it was important that that staff member know my plan in terms of communication. I actually let them read through my letter to the community, and they did have a couple of suggestions. In part, I knew, again, because we are a rural community, everyone was going to know. As much as I tried to maintain confidentiality, people are at least going to make guesses, right? So being really clear with that person about what I was going to communicate and how I felt really mattered. And I think it did result in better communication. Like I said, next, listening to the experts. I will say probably the most important piece of communication is going to be with staff and volunteers. We called or spoke in person with everyone affected, and they, of course, were the ones who were most concerned because, you know, we're in a group work environment. It really mattered that they knew who to reach out to. I made sure they all had the Lane County number. I made sure that they knew I couldn't answer medical questions, but they needed to call their physician. And also I will tell you that I think I heard back from everybody at least 2 more times, or they got in touch with their supervisors, because people have a lot of questions, they need time to process, and they'll come back to you. So be prepared for that. I will say that the other thing I made sure to do was, of course, call my board president, get the word out to all our allied groups. I wanted to make sure that anybody who got a question had some way of talking. And even though I found out very early on that it was a low risk situation, both in terms of staff and in terms of the public, I really did think that the best practice was communicating. Again, particularly in a rural community, but I think honestly, in most places, people are going to find out, or they're at least going to start making guesses. So getting ahead of that, I think, is really, really important. So then we got the word out to the public. I sent the letter everywhere I could think of. We made flyers that you hopefully received in that earlier email from Darcy that just were really basic, but told people what had happened and what to expect and who to call if they had questions. I did just want to say a couple things that I think we did pretty well that I was happy with. One of them was my board had actually been wanting us to start doing these year-long strategic plans. So I had happened to do a whole bunch of research on that right before this, and we had adopted a plan. And that plan, which again, you can see the sort of highlights of in the material Darcy sent out prior to this. One of those was that we would respond within 6 hours to any positive test. And I will say that you might think that that's going to put pressure. I actually found it super useful to have a benchmark that I needed to hit. And it almost made me feel calmer because I knew I had to deal with it and deal with it well, at least to the best of my ability. So I think that was super useful. We had also already been doing a lot of thinking about how we wanted to communicate around COVID and decided about transparency and fact as our kind of mission, our librarian way of talking, I think. I also believe strongly, personally, that at least as a director in this kind of a community, I tell people honestly how I feel about things. So if I'm unsure, if I'm stressed, if I'm any of those things, I try to be honest about that in a way that is not, I think we're all facing those things, right? So I think that that's actually good for people to hear. We do have a rule about visuals, which is that nothing can look like the zombie apocalypse. So we are trying to stay away from the microscopic virus that everybody seems to be in love with. Why is that a thing? Don't do that. It's, yeah, don't. Pick different things. We've been doing lots of things that are colorful. Kind of this color scheme is sort of similar to what we've been doing a lot of. And I think in part it's because otherwise people just go blind. They see red and virus and it's scary. I did also just want to say I looked at a few resources that I think were fantastic that are worth looking at if you have to communicate around this. Soul Cycle, their website has done a great job of laying out all the ways that they're taking care of health for folks. It's a thing that I'm really planning to adopt once we get there. Eugene YMCA had a really early positive exposure in March and April, like way before a lot of stuff was known, and they have done a great job about communicating that. Our local Dutch Brothers also had an outbreak that required a lot of testing, and I looked at their Facebook post, which was also great and straightforward. Rural caveats, just so you know, the second I posted the letter, the staff member involved had actually already had several texts, like within the first 15 minutes asking if that was the person. I will also say that I actually had 4 staff members who called before I even released the letter because they had heard by somebody who had heard by somebody. You have got to be really fast. And I suspect that's true again in any small staff and any tight-knit community. The things I would do differently, we spent a lot of time figuring this out really early on with communication. I would do a lot better at how I was going to communicate with staff upon the return of the person. I think I would also do more planning going forward for what Todd was talking about, which is if you have to roll back. I don't know about the rest of you, we're staggering staff. We're working on a really light staff, and having people out to get tested because of positive exposure and somebody out because they were ill, we really had to struggle. And in the future, you know, it might be a rollback. And then I am planning to do a more frequent director's update for patrons. We've been doing them, but I'm going to kind of try to get it on a really good schedule. So anyway, those are all my things. And you have the letter, and I love talking to other librarians. So if you have questions, always feel free to reach out.
Great. Thank you very much, Meg. I think hopefully folks will find this helpful, because I think you're right that unfortunately some or most of us are going to be in a situation similar to this at some point. And so this is very valuable. So thank you for sharing.
Thanks. And I will say, I forgot to mention this, but almost all the feedback, I don't think we got a single bit of feedback that was not positive, except we had one person post kind of a conspiracy, these tests are fake thing. But other than that, entirely positive.
Great, thank you. So I'd like to go ahead and open it up to questions. If you have a question that's specific to a particular presenter, great. Or if you just want to open it up to the group, that's fine too. So unmute yourselves, ask away, or use the chat box, and we'll make sure your questions are covered.
I have a question for Meg. You mentioned that you're doing director's updates for patrons. What do those look like?
So what I've been doing, so we are very lucky, and again, this is in part the size of our community. We have space. We get a bi-monthly newspaper column. So, and our newspaper is super well read here. It's got huge saturation. I know that is not common in all communities, but basically there's a paragraph there where I just say, hey, for example, I just got a couple of new portable hand washing stations that you're gonna love. They don't require plumbing. They're here, they're here. We just received some brand new disposable masks, but please bring your own. I mean, just kind of keeping people in the loop, positive, but also honest about what we're doing. And
So
it's going on our social media, those kind of places too.
Yeah. We do have a question. If folks are limiting the number of people entering their buildings, and maybe you could share a little bit about how you're doing that.
We are limiting, well, we set a limit, but basically we haven't even come close to hitting it. So that's another one of those plan for the worst and it doesn't happen. And our limit is about it's about 4 times higher than the state's limit. So extra precaution, extra safety. And again, we have not hit that. If you take a normal size library building, you could fit a lot of people in there with a lot of spacing. And if you've taken out furniture, we do limit the amount of time they can be in the building to 2 hours. But again, we have not even come close to hitting our limits.
And so we limit the number of people in our library, and one of the repercussions for us is that because we have these large open spaces, a lot of areas have been converted to classrooms. So we have a limit of 100 that can be in our building at one time, and we went in and took out all but 100 chairs in the entire building except for staff areas. And that's how we've monitored the numbers, that when the chairs start getting full, that's when we prep to turn folks away. We've only had one day the entire semester that we've had to turn people away.
And Todd has also shared that his RFID system tracks how many people you have in the building. And then Todd, in the chat, there's a question for you, that you started adding comfortable seating back, and Claudine says they haven't done that yet. So she was wondering how you came to that decision, and that yet they're not limiting people yet, how much time they spend inside. But yeah, talk a little bit about how you decided to start adding furniture back.
Well, one, I don't think it's the comfortable seating that's coming back, but we have people, as you can imagine, people come in that they need to sit. They're elderly, they can't stand, they may have some issue. Or we had a lot of people that were standing up straight with their laptop trying to type away, and that just wasn't really helping them. So really just kind of tracking, watching what's happening, kind of watching our customer behavior and where it made sense, adding in some furnishing.
And if anyone can share how they're managing the number of people, at any time in their library? Ginny shared that when her seats fill up, then that's kind of it for them. Does anyone else have some ideas?
We have a app on our phone that's a counting app, and we've got a person, we have a different entrance and exit, which is one of the changes that we made. And so we've got a staff greeter at the entrance, so they can offer some library help as well. And then we have a volunteer at the exit, and they're sharing the same app. So it's literally just a tap for a plus, you know, a person came in, and a tap for a minus person came in. But we found the same thing as Todd in that we're not really reaching our limit. And because of the cold weather, we've actually decided to get rid of the volunteer at the exit. We're going to just try and have circulation staff try and keep track of that. It's not a perfect fit with the app, but it works okay. And then sometimes we just have somebody run around the library and count people, and then tell the person with the app that this is what our count is right now. But we have not had an issue with too many people. Right at the beginning, we did, when we were only open 15 hours a week, we had sometimes where we had to put out a sign saying library at capacity, but nobody waited more than a few minutes. And now we're open more hours, and that's not happening at all.
Adrian, I will get back to your question around dealing with patrons who don't want to wear masks, but I did want to follow up with Kathy's question that's related about how do you then either track how long someone's been in the library if you're limiting the time per person, and then how do you kind of gently get them out?
Well, I could say that one, it's not too hard to track the people there the longer term, because most people will come in, look for books, grab them, go. They're usually out in 10 minutes. So staff are pretty aware of the ones that have been there for more than a half an hour to an hour. For the most part, people are pretty good about when we mention you're getting close to your time limits, moving on. Actually, I just saw my first incident where somebody went nuts and argued that one. So that's pretty good for a month and a half.
So how are folks dealing with patrons who want to come in and not wear a mask?
We're treating masks like shoes, shirts, and pants. We're lucky in that it's a university-wide policy. And then again, we try to use a little humor. I think people on this campus are very sick of running into me saying, let's all make our snow angels and be 6 feet. We have the policy that if it's a mask, you're not wearing your mask properly, you get one warning. And then you're asked to leave the building for the day. For people who take off their mask, we have them leave the building, and they have to leave the building for the day. We've only had to call public safety once to remove somebody from the building because they refused to put on their mask and they refused to leave. But in general, we're just doing gentle reminders. And like I said, we have little signs we hold up so that we don't have to get close to someone not wearing their mask. And so far, it's actually faculty that we have more issues with than students.
Okay.
We haven't had much of an issue with people not wearing masks, but we would do the same thing as Ginny and just, require that they leave and, remedy the situation or leave.
So we didn't see much. We don't have a lot of people in the building at once. Our issue is we cannot ask people to leave. Only public safety can do that. It will not respond to calls about people not wearing masks. So there's no, the assumed enforcement is it'll be handled through the student code of conduct, which works great in a classroom where the professor knows who everyone is, but it doesn't work in a public space where people aren't, because we don't make people wear ID cards. So there's no enforcement. There are 5 other buildings open on campus, and 4 of which are not being patrolled at all. So they did do a census of them the first 2 weeks of the school year just to see about compliance, and they found about a quarter of students were not complying with either just with distancing or mask wearing or both. The mask wearing tended to be they were in a room, you know, like study rooms effectively in other buildings. And so they're trying to figure out how to address those, either by closing particular areas off or patrolling. I would say those results have made me much less likely to open any other part of the building up, because we would be on our own without being able to enforce anything, and knowing that a quarter of, you know, they hit a quarter of people. So, you know, we were looking at maybe when we hit phase 2 reopening, whenever Multnomah County does that, we might reopen the second floor as a study area, but that's less likely at this point, because we know patrolling would fall to us and there'd be no backup.
We have a question for Meg. If you were asked by the health department to participate in contact tracing or not?
So that is an interesting question. So we have been super careful. You know, to me, almost from the beginning, it's been clear that the real concern is congregate work settings, even more than the interaction with patrons, right? So we have been super cautious here about maintaining 6 feet distance, being masked, all of those in all of our staff areas. None of us met the criteria for a close contact. So none of us and none of our patrons were contacted because none of us met that criteria. Even with the change to the CDC criteria that it's 15 minutes over 24 hours, none of us would have met that criteria. And I will say that was the one thing when I got the news that made me feel a little better, was that we had actually been doing the right thing in terms of, and I will say, I still think there's so much luck involved, right? It could have gone wrong, but we did not meet the criteria.
Great, thanks, Meg. And then I think Jana kind of had a follow-up question, is that during the time that your staff person tested positive, was that also a time that you had public people or public patrons in the building? Yeah.
So this staff member we're doing twice daily computer appointments. This staff member had hosted, I believe, 2 of those over the week that they were probably infectious. It was, again, a situation where we knew that it was none of those people qualified as no contact, but it was also, again, one of the reasons that I felt like by far the best practice was letting people know about what had happened. I don't think I mentioned this, but we did have some other staff members and volunteers who had been in the building decide to get tested, and they did all come back negative, which again was, I cannot say what a relief it was, but and I definitely think that, you know, we tried to explain exactly when the person was in the building in the letter I sent out to everybody, just so that if a patron had a concern, we said, get in touch with Lane County Public Health, get in touch with your PCP, and they can advise you on next steps.
Great, thank you, Meg. I think we have time for one more question before we give our presenters a big round of applause. Any last questions?
Do any of you have in your procedures something to address if a staff member has a family member that's tested and told to quarantine until the test results come back? Is that employee then allowed to return to work during that time? Our procedures didn't include that one scenario, and several people told us, oh, you can't have them stay home if there was no positive test within the family. So has anybody addressed that?
I mean, our university policy would be that they have to quarantine themselves for 14 days. And so, you know, we didn't need a policy. The university already had one.
I would say for those of you also who are perhaps in a situation where you don't have, again, like HR or somebody, call your public health and say, what is your recommendation? You know, I think that relying on them is both best practice and also the least likely to get you into trouble.
Yeah, that's what I did. I called public health and they said, well, you know, in best of all worlds, that person would quarantine, but as an employer, you can't say that. Yeah. So what we did was I said, I'm going to have you work from home until that test result comes back. So it didn't affect pay or anything, but it was sort of a different situation. And that person also didn't notify myself as director. I just sort of heard it when I walked by the front desk because she's a denier.
Well, and I do see the question from Jeremy. Darcy, can I just take
Yeah,
that
go
really
ahead.
fast?
Yep.
Because it was interesting. I had a bunch of staff members, well, not a bunch. I mean, we're a tiny library, not tiny, mid-sized. We had some staff members though who wanted to get tested, and it was interesting that they got different responses from their PCPs. So know that. We are still in a space where there is all kinds of confusion across the board. In the end, everybody did end up getting tested who asked for that. And I think in part it was also because Lane County is having increased community transmission. But you may have staff members get different feedback from their providers. And you may have to help them sort of navigate that.
Great. Thanks, Meg. And thanks to each of our presenters, Ginny, Jenny, Todd, Michael, and Meg. You all did a fantastic job. And thank you again for taking the time to share today. All right. Thanks, everyone, for attending. And the recording will be made available soon. Thanks, Meg.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good luck.
Bye, everyone.
Everybody.